The funeral home's fluorescent lights cast a sickly pallor over everything, making the cheap carpet look even more threadbare than usual. Maya Castellanos sat alone in the far corner of the viewing room, her fingers twisted around a crumpled tissue that had long since served its purpose. At 28, she looked younger in her grief, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that spoke of 3 sleepless nights spent making arrangements no one else would handle. The whispers started before Brad and Jennifer even entered the room properly. Maya could hear their voices carrying from the hallway, sharp and cutting through the manufactured solemnity of Peaceful Rest Funeral Home. She didn't need to strain to catch the words. They wanted her to hear. Just look at her sitting there like she belongs. Jennifer's voice dripped with disdain. Playing the grieving daughter when she's nothing but an outsider who wormed her way into our family. Maya's chest tightened, but she kept her eyes fixed on Robert's casket. Even in death, her stepfather looked peaceful, his weathered hands folded over the navy suit she'd picked out because it was his favorite. The same hands that had taught her to drive stick shift in an empty parking lot when she was 16, patient even when she stalled the engine for the 20th time. Brad Hendricks strode into the room with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. At 35, he carried himself like someone accustomed to getting his way, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Maya's simple black dress from Target. His wife Cynthia followed closely behind, her perfectly manicured nails already typing on her phone, probably calculating inheritance taxes. Where are you all watching this unfold from tonight? I'd love to hear in the comments where you're tuned in from as we dive into this story of justice. Whether you're watching from New York or Nevada, this tale of family betrayal hits close to home for so many of us. Jennifer Walsh entered last, her blonde hair styled in that aggressive way that screamed expensive salon. At 32, she had perfected the art of looking down on people, even those taller than her 5'4" frame. Her designer handbag probably cost more than Maya, made in 2 months as an elementary school teacher. Maya forced herself to stand as they approached, muscle memory from years of trying to bridge the gap between her and Robert's biological children. The effort had never been reciprocated. Well, the little princess is here early, Brad said, his voice carrying that particular brand of cruelty that came wrapped in false pleasantries. I suppose you think you're first in line for everything now that Dad's gone. Maya's throat felt raw from crying, but she managed to speak. I just wanted some time alone with him before the service tomorrow. Jennifer laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Alone time. How precious. You do realize this is our father we're talking about, right? Not some substitute daddy you can mourn like you're actually family. The words hit like physical blows, but Maya had endured worse from them over the years. What made it unbearable now was that Robert wasn't here to deflect their venom with his gentle humor and protective presence. Actually, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper, Robert was more of a father to me than most people ever get. He raised me from the time I was 8 years old. Brad's expression turned truly ugly then, his face flushing red above his $1,000 suit collar. Raised you? Is that what you call it? Dad felt sorry for your mother and her pathetic kid, so he took you both in out of the goodness of his heart. That doesn't make you family, sweetheart. Maya's mother had died 3 years ago, leaving her feeling adrift in a way she'd never fully recovered from. Elena Castellanos had been the bridge between Maya and Robert's world, the translator who helped a grieving 80-year-old understand that this kind man who married her mother truly wanted them both in his life. Without Elena, Maya had felt increasingly isolated from the Hendricks family dynamics, tolerated rather than welcomed. And now Robert was gone too, taken by the same aggressive cancer that had claimed Elena. Maya had spent the last 6 months sleeping in the guest room of the family home, taking leave from her teaching job to care for him around the clock. She'd administered medications, managed his doctor appointments, held his hand through the worst of the chemotherapy sessions that ultimately proved futile. Cynthia looked up from her phone long enough to smirk. I have to say, it's almost touching how she thinks she's entitled to grieve like a real daughter. Robert always was too soft-hearted for his own good. Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. Dad never could see when people were taking advantage of him. Remember how Maya's mother was always finding reasons they needed more money. Private school for Maya, car repairs, medical bills that insurance somehow never covered completely. That's not true, Maya protested. but her voice cracked midway through the sentence. My mother worked 2 jobs to contribute to household expenses. She never asked Robert for anything she didn't absolutely need. Oh, please, Brad said, rolling his eyes. Your mother saw a lonely widower with money and played the perfect grieving widow card. Classic gold digger playbook. And now here you are, 20 years later, still working the same angle. The accusation was so breathtakingly unfair that Maya actually gasped. Robert had been widowed for 3 years when he met Elena at a grief counseling group. Both of them had lost spouses to cancer. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on shared understanding of loss and genuine affection that anyone could see was real. Maya tried again, her voice stronger now with indignation. Robert loved my mother, and he loved me. We were a family for 20 years. Jennifer emphasized cruelly. Past tense. Mother's dead, dad's dead, and now you're just a random woman with no legal connection to any of us. It's time to face reality. Maya felt the floor shifting under her feet, literally and figuratively. She hadn't thought much about legal connections or inheritance rights. She'd been too busy grieving and trying to process a world without Robert's steady presence. But looking at Brad and Jennifer's predatory expressions, she realized they'd clearly thought about little else. What exactly are you saying? Maya asked, though part of her already knew she didn't want to hear the answer. Brad's smile was all teeth and no warmth. We're saying it's time for you to pack up your things and find somewhere else to live, Maya. The house belongs to Dad's actual children now, his biological heirs. You were just a long-term house guest who overstayed her welcome. The room spun slightly around the edges of Maya's vision. She'd lived in that house for 20 years. Her childhood bedroom was on the 2nd floor, still decorated with the butterfly wallpaper Robert had helped her choose when she was 9. Her mother's garden was in the backyard, lovingly maintained by Robert even after Elena's death. It was the only home she'd ever really known. You can't just kick me out, Maya said, hearing the desperation creeping into her own voice. This is my home too. Jennifer's laugh was even uglier this time. Your home. Sweetie, your name isn't on any deed. Your name isn't on any bank account. Your name isn't on any legal document that matters. You're nobody in the eyes of the law. Brad pulled out his phone and made a show of checking the time. We're being generous here, Maya. We could have the sheriff escort you out tomorrow after the funeral, but we're giving you 48 hours to gather your personal belongings and find alternative accommodations. Maya's legs felt unsteady, forcing her to grip the back of a folding chair for support. Where am I supposed to go? I don't have money saved for an apartment deposit. I used my savings caring for Robert these past months. Cynthia finally looked up from her phone again, her expression one of theatrical sympathy. That sounds like a personal problem, honey. Maybe you should have thought about your future financial security before playing nurse for 6 months. Maybe one of your teacher friends has a spare room, Jennifer suggested with mock helpfulness. Or there are some lovely extended stay motels on the interstate. Very reasonable rates for someone on a teacher's salary. Maya felt tears threatening again, hot and shameful. She'd always been emotional, something Robert had found endearing, but his biological children clearly saw as weakness to exploit. I don't understand how you can be so cruel, Maya whispered. Robert wouldn't want this. He'd be heartbroken to see how you're treating me. Brad's expression hardened completely. Don't you dare presume to know what our father would have wanted. You were a charity case he took pity on, nothing more. He might have tolerated your presence for Mom Elena's sake, but that obligation died with her 3 years ago. The funeral home director appeared in the doorway, clearly sensing tension but too professional to acknowledge it directly. The family visitation hours begin in 30 minutes if you'd like to make any final arrangements. Maya realized this might be her last chance for private time with Robert, but Brad and Jennifer showed no signs of leaving. They'd claimed their territory and seemed determined to assert dominance even in this sacred space. We'll need a few more minutes alone with our father, Jennifer told the director pointedly, making sure Maya caught the emphasis on our father. Maya understood the dismissal for what it was. She leaned down to Robert's casket one final time, her hand resting gently on the cold metal edge. Thank you for everything, Dad, she whispered, using the name she'd called him since childhood despite knowing it would enrage Brad and Jennifer further. Behind her, she heard Jennifer's sharp intake of breath at the word Dad, followed by Brad's muttered curse. But Maya was past caring about their offense. She had bigger problems now, like figuring out where she'd be sleeping in 48 hours. As she gathered her purse and walked toward the exit, Maya heard Jennifer's voice following her. "Oh, and Maya, we've already contacted the estate lawyer. The will reading is scheduled for Monday morning. You're not invited, obviously, since you have no legal standing. But don't worry, we'll be sure to let you know how everything gets divided up between the actual family members." Maya's hand trembled on the door handle, but she didn't turn around. She couldn't bear to see their satisfied expressions, the way they were already mentally dividing up Robert's possessions like vultures picking over a carcass. The November air hit her face like a slap as she stepped outside the funeral home. 2 days to find a new place to live. No savings to speak of. No family left except the 2 people who'd made it clear she wasn't family at all. Maya sat in her old Honda Civic, the engine making its familiar rattling sound as she tried to process what had just happened. 48 hours ago, she'd been grieving daughter saying goodbye to her father. Now she was apparently just a homeless charity case with delusions of belonging. But as she sat there in the funeral home parking lot, watching Brad and Jennifer through the window, as they started going through Robert's jacket pockets, Maya felt something besides despair beginning to kindle in her chest. It was small and fragile, but it felt distinctly like anger. Robert had loved her. She knew that with absolute certainty, regardless of what his biological children claimed. And somehow, some way, she was going to find a way to prove it. Maya barely slept that night, lying in the guest room bed where she'd spent the last 6 months caring for Robert during his final battle with cancer. Every creak of the old house seemed to mock her, reminding her that these familiar sounds would soon be nothing but memories. She'd grown up in this room after her mother married Robert, graduated high school from this address, came home for college breaks to this sanctuary that had always felt permanent and safe. The funeral service passed in a blur of hollow condolences and awkward conversations. Maya noticed how quickly people's demeanor changed when Brad or Jennifer approached, their warm sympathy toward Maya instantly replaced by deferential attention to the biological heirs. It was as if everyone instinctively understood the new power dynamics at play, leaving Maya feeling increasingly invisible among people who had known her for 20 years. By Monday morning, the Hendricks siblings had moved with military precision. Maya returned from her teaching job to find a locksmith's van in the driveway, and her house, key rendered useless. She stood on the front porch of her childhood home, fumbling with a lock that no longer recognized her, feeling like a stranger trying to break into someone else's life. Brad answered her frantic knocking with a smile that could have powered a small city with its smugness. "Oh good, you're here. We need to supervise while you collect your personal items. Can't have you accidentally taking anything that belongs to the estate." Maya's hands shook as she stepped into the foyer where Robert had taught her to tie her shoes, where he'd taken first day of school photos every year until she graduated college. The house felt different already, colder somehow, as if Brad and Jennifer's presence had sucked the warmth from the walls. Jennifer emerged from the kitchen carrying a cardboard box and wearing rubber gloves like she was handling toxic waste. "I've started going through the medicine cabinet and linen closets. Amazing how much junk accumulates when nobody's paying attention. We'll definitely need a dumpster." That junk included Robert's reading glasses, the ones Maya had cleaned daily during his illness. His favorite coffee mug sat in the box too, the one that read World's Best Dad that Maya had given him for Father's Day when she was 12. She reached for it instinctively. Jennifer said, pulling the box away. "Estate property. You can take your personal belongings from your bedroom, but everything else stays here for proper inventory." Maya climbed the stairs to her childhood bedroom, each step feeling like a march toward execution. The butterfly wallpaper looked faded now, childish, but Robert had spent an entire weekend helping her put it up when she was 9, patient as she changed her mind about placement 3 times. Her belongings filled 2 small suitcases and a garbage bag. 20 years of life reduced to what could fit in the trunk of a Honda Civic. As she packed, Maya could hear Brad and Jennifer moving through the house below, their voices carrying up through the old heating vents. "Estate lawyer says we can list the house immediately," Brad was saying. "Market's hot right now. We could see offers within a week." "Good," Jennifer replied. "I want this whole mess wrapped up before Christmas. My kids are asking about their grandfather's inheritance, and I'd like to give them some concrete numbers." Maya's stomach clenched. Robert's grandchildren were 8 and 10 years old, sweet kids who'd called Maya Aunt Maya their entire lives. Apparently, even those relationships were being severed with surgical precision. As Maya descended the stairs with her meager possessions, she noticed Brad rifling through Robert's desk in the living room. He'd already separated papers into neat piles, efficiency trumping sentiment at every turn. "Find anything interesting?" Jennifer asked, appearing with another box of Robert's personal effects destined for disposal. "Just the usual. Insurance policies, bank statements, medical bills." Dad was meticulous about record keeping. "Makes our job easier." Brad held up a leather-bound photo album. "Look at this, though. Wedding pictures from when he married Elena. Pretty pathetic, really." Maya's heart stopped. Those were the only photos she had of her mother's wedding day, the happiest day Elena had ever described to her daughter. Maya had looked through that album countless times over the years, studying her mother's radiant smile, Robert's gentle expression as he promised to love and protect both Elena and Maya. "Can I please have that album?" Maya asked, setting down her suitcases. "Those are pictures of my mother." Jennifer snatched the album before Brad could respond, flipping through it with theatrical disdain. "Your mother certainly cleaned up well for the occasion. I'll give her credit. She knew how to play the part of the blushing bride. Too bad she was just angling for financial security." "That's not true," Maya said, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "My mother loved Robert genuinely. Anyone who knew them could see that." Jennifer's laugh was pure venom. "Oh, sweetie, you were just a child. You believed the fairy tale version they fed you. But adults understand what really happened here. Your mother found herself a lonely widower with money and played him like a violin." Maya watched in horror as Jennifer began systematically tearing photos from the album, her manicured nails leaving scratches across Elena's face in picture after picture. The sound of ripping paper filled the room like gunshots. "Stop it," Maya pleaded, lunging forward. "Please stop destroying them." Brad stepped between them, his large frame blocking Maya's access to the album. Jennifer continued her methodical destruction behind his protective bulk. "Estate property," he said simply. "Dad's photos, Dad's album, Dad's decision about what happens to them." "But those are the only pictures I have of my mother's wedding day," Maya said, tears flowing freely now. "Please, you can keep the album. Just let me have copies of the photos with my mother in them." Jennifer held up a torn picture of Elena in her wedding dress, Robert's arm visible around her waist before the rip severed them forever. "Your mother was a gold-digging opportunist who saw dollar signs when she looked at our father. These pictures are evidence of her manipulation. The trash is exactly where they belong." Maya watched helplessly as 20 years of memories disappeared into Jennifer's destruction spree. Photos of family vacations, birthday parties, graduations, Christmas mornings, all reduced to confetti by fingers that moved with surgical precision. "Take a good hard look at this reality check," Brad said, his voice cruel with satisfaction. "This is what happens when charity cases start thinking they're family. You get reminded of your actual place in the world. Family bonds mean everything, don't they? Whether you're watching this from your own family home tonight or thinking about the people who truly made you feel like you belonged somewhere. These connections run deeper than blood sometimes. But what happens when those bonds get tested by greed and legal technicalities? Let me know in the comments what family means to you, because this story is about to show us the difference between real love and legal ownership." Maya's knees buckled slightly as the full weight of her situation crashed down around her. She was homeless, nearly broke, and watching 2 decades of family history get destroyed by people who seemed to take actual pleasure in her suffering. Then Brad delivered the next blow with casual cruelty. "Oh, by the way, we sold Dad's Buick this morning. Got a decent price for it too, considering the mileage. Cash sale, very convenient." Maya's breath caught. That was the car Robert had taught her to drive, the one she'd been using to get to work since her old Honda started making ominous noises last month. Robert had mentioned multiple times that he wanted Maya to have the Buick eventually, said it was more reliable than her aging Civic. "You sold my car," Maya whispered. "Correction," Jennifer said without looking up from her photo destruction. "We sold our father's car. You know, the one that was titled in his name, insured under his policy, registered to his address. Amazing how ownership works when you actually understand legal concepts. But Robert let me drive it. He said it would be mine someday. Maya knew how pathetic she sounded even as the words left her mouth. Dad said a lot of things, Brad replied with a shrug. Doesn't make them legally binding. Besides, what exactly were you planning to do with a car when you don't have anywhere to park it? The cruelty was so casual, so effortless, that Maya realized this wasn't spontaneous meanness. Brad and Jennifer had planned this systematic humiliation, probably discussed it in detail while she was sitting beside Robert's hospital bed, holding his hand through chemotherapy sessions. You can't do this, Maya said, but even she could hear how hollow her protest sounded. You can't just erase 20 years of my life like it never happened. Jennifer finally looked up from the destroyed wedding photos, her eyes bright with malicious satisfaction. Watch us. By this time next week, this house will be on the market, Dad's accounts will be distributed between his actual heirs, and you'll be a footnote in family history that nobody bothers remembering. Maya tried calling Robert's oldest friend that evening, Harold Garrison, thinking surely someone who'd known the family for 30 years would offer support or at least neutral perspective. Harold had been Robert's best man, had attended every major family celebration for 2 decades. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes. Harold's wife Margaret answered the phone, her voice strangely formal when she recognized Maya's voice. Margaret, it's Maya Castellanos. I was hoping to speak with Harold about Robert's funeral arrangements and maybe get some advice about. Oh, honey, Margaret interrupted, her tone dripping with newfound sympathy that felt performative. Harold and I heard about your situation from Brad yesterday. We had no idea you weren't actually Robert's legal daughter all these years. What a difficult position you must be in now. Maya's heart sank as she realized Brad and Jennifer had already begun their poison campaign, rewriting family history to make Maya's presence seem illegitimate from the beginning. Harold's been so upset since learning the truth about your relationship to Robert, Margaret continued with theatrical sadness. He feels terrible that he never realized you were just Elena's daughter, not Robert's actual child. We always assumed there had been a proper adoption or something legal. There was a proper relationship, Maya tried to explain. Robert raised me from age 8. He was my father in every way that mattered. Of course, dear, but legally speaking, that's quite different from actual parentage, isn't it? Margaret's voice carried that particular brand of condescension that made Maya want to scream. Harold thinks it's probably best if you focus on building your own independent life now instead of dwelling on what you've lost. Maya hung up feeling more isolated than ever. If Harold and Margaret could be turned against her so easily, what hope did she have with other family friends who knew her less intimately? By Wednesday evening, Maya was staying in a cramped motel room that smelled of cigarettes and industrial disinfectant, paying $70 a night she couldn't afford while frantically searching for apartment rentals that would accept someone with her limited savings and modest teacher salary. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Jennifer. Thought you should know we're having an estate sale this weekend. All of Dad's furniture and personal effects need to go before we list the house. You're welcome to attend if you want to bid on anything sentimental, assuming you can afford it. The message included a photo of Robert's favorite armchair, the worn leather recliner where he'd read Maya bedtime stories when she was young, where they'd watched Sunday afternoon movies together throughout her teenage years. Someone had attached a price tag to the headrest. $50. Maya stared at the image until her vision blurred with tears. $50 for 20 years of Sunday afternoons, for countless conversations about school and boys and dreams and fears. $50 for the chair where Robert had dozed off during her high school graduation party, exhausted from pride and celebration. She didn't have $50 to spare. Maya curled up on the motel bed, still wearing her teaching clothes because unpacking felt like admitting defeat. Tomorrow she'd have to face her classroom full of third graders, pretend everything was normal, maintain the cheerful competence they needed from their teacher while her entire world collapsed around her. But as Maya lay there listening to traffic outside her temporary window, something began hardening inside her chest. It felt like anger, but deeper than that. It felt like determination born from desperation. Robert had loved her. She knew that truth in her bones, regardless of what legal documents said or didn't say. And somehow, some way, she was going to prove that his biological children were wrong about everything that mattered. The Riverside County Probate Court building looked exactly like what Maya had expected from a place where dreams went to die. Built in the 1970s with all the architectural charm of a concrete bunker, its fluorescent-lit hallways echoed with the shuffling footsteps of people navigating life's worst moments. Maya sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom 3B, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling, watching lawyers in expensive suits stride past with briefcases that probably cost more than her monthly salary. Her public defender, James Murphy, arrived 15 minutes late with coffee stains on his wrinkled shirt and an overstuffed manila folder that looked ready to explode. At 50-something, Murphy had the weary expression of a man who'd seen too many hopeless cases and learned not to invest emotionally in outcomes he couldn't control. "Miss Castellanos, right?" Murphy said, consulting a handwritten note that looked like it had been scrawled during a phone call. "Sorry I'm running behind. Heavy caseload this week. Let's see. You're contesting the inheritance distribution for Robert Hendricks, deceased November 3rd. Maya nodded, though contesting felt like too strong a word for her desperate hope that someone might recognize her 20-year relationship with Robert meant something legally. "I just think there might be some mistake about the will. Robert always said I was like a daughter to him." Murphy's expression grew even more tired. "Miss Castellanos, family relationships and legal relationships are very different things. Unless you were formally adopted or specifically named in a will, stepchildren generally have no inheritance rights under California law." "But surely there's something," Maya pressed. "I cared for him during his final illness. I was closer to him than his biological children, who barely visited." "Emotional closeness doesn't translate to legal standing," Murphy said gently but firmly. "I've reviewed the preliminary estate documents. Robert Hendricks died intestate, meaning no valid will was found. Under California's succession laws, his estate passes to his surviving biological children in equal shares." Maya felt the familiar sensation of the floor shifting beneath her, the same vertigo she'd experienced since this nightmare began. But Robert was so organized about everything else. His medical records, his financial statements. It doesn't make sense that he wouldn't have a will. Murphy shrugged with practiced indifference. "Happens more often than you'd think. People put off estate planning, especially when they're dealing with serious illness. The emotional energy goes toward treatment rather than legal preparation." Before Maya could respond, the courtroom doors opened and Brad Hendricks emerged, flanked by what looked like a small army of legal representation. The lead attorney was a woman in her 40s with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her charcoal suit probably worth more than Maya made in 3 months. 2 junior associates followed behind, wheeling cases full of documents and looking like they'd stepped out of a law school recruitment brochure. Jennifer Walsh appeared moments later, her designer heels clicking against the marble floor with military precision. She wore black, but it was the kind of expensive black that managed to look more like a power suit than morning attire. Her smile when she spotted Maya was pure predatory satisfaction. Well, Jennifer said, her voice carrying just far enough for Maya to hear. "I see our little charity case found herself a lawyer after all. How resourceful." Murphy stood straighter when he recognized the opposing counsel, his shoulders squaring like a boxer preparing for a fight he knew he couldn't win. "That's Victoria Ashworth from Ashworth, Sterling and Associates. They specialize in high-value estate litigation. This case just got a lot more complicated." Maya watched as the legal teams exchanged professional courtesies, their polite smiles not quite masking the underlying aggression. Victoria Ashworth moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to winning, her handshake brief and her eye contact calculated to intimidate. The Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves called the hearing to order promptly at 9:30, her gray hair and no-nonsense demeanor suggesting decades of experience with family disputes that brought out humanity's worst impulses. She reviewed the case summary with efficient professionalism, occasionally glancing up to study the parties involved. "This is a petition to determine inheritance distribution for the estate of Robert Michael Hendricks, deceased November 3rd, Judge Reeves announced. The estate includes real property valued at approximately $800,000, liquid assets of roughly $400,000, and various personal effects. Are there any preliminary motions before we proceed?" Victoria Ashworth rose with fluid grace. "Your Honor, my clients Brad Hendricks and Jennifer Walsh are the deceased's biological children and sole legal heirs under California intestate succession statutes. We move to dismiss any claims by non-family members who lack standing in this matter. Judge Reeves turned her attention to Murphy, who fumbled with his folder before standing. Your Honor, my client Maya Castellanos lived with the deceased as his stepdaughter for 20 years and provided primary caregiving during his final illness. We believe her emotional and practical contributions to the family unit merit consideration in estate distribution. The judge's expression remained neutral, but Maya caught a slight softening around her eyes that might have been sympathy. Mr. Murphy, while the court appreciates Ms. Castellanos' devotion to the deceased, emotional contributions don't create legal inheritance rights absent formal adoption or specific testamentary provisions. Maya's heart sank as she watched her last hope dissolve in the face of legal reality. Murphy continued gamely, presenting character witnesses and testimonials about Maya's relationship with Robert, but even Maya could see how futile the effort was becoming. Victoria Ashworth demolished each argument with surgical precision, citing case law and precedent that reduced Maya's 20-year family relationship to legally meaningless sentiment. She spoke about Maya with clinical detachment, as if discussing a piece of property rather than a grieving daughter. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ashworth continued, allowing emotional appeals to override clear statutory succession would set dangerous precedent. Adult stepchildren could claim inheritance rights based solely on residential cohabitation or caregiving activities, regardless of the deceased's actual intentions. Judge Reeves nodded thoughtfully. The court recognizes this is an emotionally difficult situation for all parties, but we must follow established law rather than individual circumstances, however compelling. Maya felt tears threatening and blinked hard to suppress them, unwilling to give Brad and Jennifer the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. She glanced around the courtroom, taking in the formal portraits of past judges and the California state flag that seemed to mock her with its promise of justice for all. That's when she noticed him. An elderly Asian man sat in the gallery's back row, wearing a well-tailored suit and watching the proceedings with intense focus. Something about his presence felt significant, though Maya couldn't identify why. He wasn't taking notes or consulting documents like the other observers, just listening with the concentrated attention of someone who understood exactly what was happening and found it personally meaningful. The man's eyes met Maya's for a brief moment, and she saw something there that looked almost like recognition. He nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle she might have imagined it, before returning his attention to the legal arguments. Murphy was making his final plea, his voice carrying more passion than Maya had expected from someone who'd seemed so defeated earlier. Miss Castellanos dedicated her adult life to caring for Robert Hendricks. She postponed her own career advancement, depleted her savings, and provided round-the-clock care during his terminal illness. Surely such devotion merits some acknowledgement in estate distribution. Victoria Ashworth rose again, her rebuttal crisp and merciless. Your Honor, California law doesn't recognize devotion as grounds for inheritance. If we allowed emotional arguments to supersede statutory succession, every caregiver, housekeeper, or frequent visitor could potentially claim estate rights. The law requires clear documentation of intent, not subjective interpretations of relationship quality. Judge Reeves appeared ready to rule when the court clerk approached the bench with a manila folder, whispering urgently in the judge's ear. Maya watched the exchange with growing curiosity, especially when Judge Reeves frowned and asked the clerk to repeat whatever she'd said. There appears to be some question about completeness of the estate documentation, Judge Reeves announced after a moment. The court has been informed that certain records may not have been properly reviewed during the initial probate filing. Victoria Ashworth's confident expression flickered slightly. Your Honor, my clients provided all available documentation from the deceased's personal effects and financial institutions. Nevertheless, Judge Reeves continued, the court wants to ensure all relevant materials have been considered before making final determinations. We'll adjourn for 30 minutes while the clerk researches potential additional filings. As the courtroom emptied for recess, Maya noticed the elderly Asian man approaching slowly, his movements deliberate and purposeful. He stopped a respectful distance away, his expression kind but unreadable. Miss Castellanos, he said quietly, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who'd learned English as a second language. My name is Martin Chun. I was your stepfather's attorney for many years, until his recent illness. I wonder if I might have a word with you privately. Maya's pulse quickened. Murphy was gathering his scattered papers and didn't seem to notice the conversation beginning beside him. Maya glanced toward Brad and Jennifer, who were huddled with their legal team near the courtroom's far corner, their animated discussion suggesting they weren't pleased with the unexpected delay. Of course, Maya said, following Martin Chun toward a quieter alcove near the building's main entrance. He moved with the careful precision of someone who chose his words as deliberately as his steps. I've been waiting for this moment, Mr. Chun said once they were out of earshot. Your stepfather retained my services several years ago for some very specific legal work. Work that may be relevant to your current situation. Maya's heart began beating faster. What kind of legal work? Martin Chun reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a business card, pressing it gently into Maya's palm. The kind that requires very careful timing to be effective. I think you should call my office this afternoon, Miss Castellanos. There are things about Robert's planning that his biological children may not be aware of. Before Maya could ask follow-up questions, Chun smiled and walked toward the courthouse exit with the same measured pace he'd used to approach her. Maya stared at the business card in her hand, noting the elegant letterhead and downtown address that suggested success and discretion in equal measure. When court reconvened, Judge Reeves looked distinctly thoughtful. The clerk has confirmed that additional estate documents were filed with the court in 2015, but appear to have been misfiled in county records. We're scheduling a continuation hearing for Friday morning to allow all parties time to review any newly discovered materials. Victoria Ashworth's professional composure slipped slightly. Your Honor, my clients weren't aware of any additional filings. We'd appreciate clarification about the nature and scope of these documents. All parties will receive copies once the documents are properly retrieved and authenticated, Judge Reeves replied firmly. Court is adjourned until Friday at 9 a.m. As Maya gathered her things, she caught Brad and Jennifer exchanging worried glances for the first time since this legal battle began. Their supreme confidence seemed slightly shaken, replaced by the first hint of uncertainty she'd seen from either of them. Maya walked out of the courthouse with Martin Chin's business card clutched in her hand and something that felt suspiciously like hope beginning to bloom in her chest. Maybe Robert had been more prepared for this moment than anyone realized. Martin Chin's law office occupied the 32nd floor of the Gateway Tower downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city that Maya had never seen from this height. The reception area featured polished mahogany furniture and original oil paintings that screamed understated wealth, a far cry from the cramped public defender's office where Maya had met with James Murphy just days earlier. Maya felt underdressed in her Target blazer and sensible flats, but Martin Chin greeted her with the same gentle courtesy he'd shown at the courthouse, as if designer suits and teaching salaries were equally worthy of his time and attention. Please, sit anywhere you're comfortable, Chin said, gesturing toward a seating area that probably cost more than Maya's annual rent. Can I offer you coffee, tea, water? You've had a difficult week, and I want to make sure you're as comfortable as possible for this conversation. Maya accepted coffee more for something to do with her nervous hands than actual thirst, watching as Chun prepared the beverage with careful attention to detail that suggested this ritual mattered to him. Everything about his office spoke of meticulous organization, from the precisely arranged legal volumes to the family photographs positioned at exact angles on his desk. I have to admit, Mr. Chun, Maya began once they were both seated, I'm confused about why Robert never mentioned having a lawyer. He was so organized about everything else, his medical appointments, his financial records, even his grocery lists. It seems strange that he wouldn't have told me about legal planning. Chin smiled with what appeared to be genuine fondness. Robert was extremely organized, you're absolutely right. But he was also very strategic about information sharing. He understood that some knowledge needed to be protected until the proper moment for revelation. Maya set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. What kind of knowledge? Chin rose and walked to a tall filing cabinet, retrieving a thick folder that looked well-worn from frequent handling. He placed it on the coffee table between them, his fingers resting on the manila surface like he was touching something sacred. Robert retained my services in March of 2015, Chin said, his voice carrying the weight of carefully guarded secrets. He was very specific about the scope of our work and especially specific about timing. He said, and I remember his exact words, that this work should only be revealed if his biological children ever attempted to deny Maya's place in the family. Maya's heart began beating faster. March 2015 was shortly after her mother's death, during those dark months when she'd felt most isolated and uncertain about her future. Robert had been grieving Elena's loss, while simultaneously trying to comfort Maya through her own devastating grief. "What kind of legal work?" Maya asked, though part of her was afraid to hear the answer. Chen opened the folder carefully, revealing documents that looked official and complex, heavy legal paper with embossed seals and signatures that suggested serious business. The retainer was paid in full that day, along with instructions that I should monitor local probate filings for Robert's name. When he passed, I was to wait and observe the family dynamics before taking any action. Maya stared at the documents without really seeing them, her mind racing with implications. Robert had been planning for this moment, anticipating that his biological children might treat her exactly as they had. The revelation was both heartbreaking and oddly comforting. "He knew this would happen," Maya whispered. "He knew Brad and Jennifer would try to push me out." Chen nodded solemnly. Robert was a very astute judge of character, Miss Castellanos. He loved his biological children, but he wasn't blind to their limitations. More importantly, he wanted to ensure your security and your rightful place in his legacy. Before Maya could ask more questions, Chen's secretary knocked and entered with a message that seemed to energize him instantly. "The courthouse called," she said quietly. "The documents from 2015 have been retrieved and authenticated. Judge Reeves wants all parties to receive copies before tomorrow's hearing." Chen's smile grew wider. "Excellent timing. Miss Castellanos, I think it's time we let the opposing counsel know that your legal representation has changed. I suspect tomorrow's hearing will be quite different from what they're expecting." The next morning, Maya walked into courtroom 3B feeling like she was inhabiting someone else's life. Martin Chen strode beside her carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had been crafted by artisans, his presence commanding a level of respect that Maya had never seen directed toward her before. Brad and Jennifer were already seated with Victoria Ashworth, their confident chatter from earlier hearings replaced by subdued conversation that looked distinctly nervous. When they spotted Chen, their faces went through a fascinating progression of emotions, starting with confusion and rapidly progressing towards something that looked like dread. Victoria Ashworth's professional composure slipped noticeably as Chen approached the plaintiff's table. She clearly recognized his reputation, and equally clearly hadn't expected to face someone of his caliber in what should have been a straightforward intestate succession case. "Mr. Chen," Ashworth said, rising to shake hands with the kind of forced politeness that barely concealed alarm. "I wasn't aware you'd been retained in this matter." Chen's handshake was brief and professional. "Miss Castellanos and I have had a long-standing relationship through her stepfather's estate planning. I'm simply ensuring her interests are properly represented." Maya watched Brad and Jennifer exchanging increasingly frantic whispers, their earlier supremacy evaporating as they realized the legal playing field had suddenly become much more level. Jennifer's face had taken on a grayish pallor that made her expensive makeup look garish, while Brad kept checking his phone as if hoping for rescue that wasn't coming. Judge Reeves called the hearing to order with her usual efficiency, but Maya noticed the judge studying Martin Chen with the kind of recognition that suggested professional respect earned over years of courtroom encounters. "I understand counsel for Miss Castellanos has changed since our last session," Judge Reeves noted. "Mr. Chen, are you prepared to proceed with the matter at hand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Chen replied, rising with fluid grace. "However, I'd like to request a complete review of all estate documentation before we continue with distribution determinations. My preliminary review suggests the estate may be more complex than initially represented." Victoria Ashworth stood immediately, her voice carrying a slight edge that betrayed her growing concern. "Your Honor, my clients have provided all available estate materials. Any delays at this point seem designed to prolong what should be a straightforward intestate succession proceeding." Chen's smile was perfectly polite and absolutely devastating. "Your Honor, I have reason to believe that characterizing this estate as intestate may be premature. Additional documentation exists that may materially affect distribution determinations. Judge Reeves leaned forward with obvious interest. What kind of additional documentation, Mr. Chun? Chun opened his briefcase with deliberate precision, withdrawing a document that looked thick and official. Your Honor, I'd like to present Robert Hendricks's last will and testament, executed in my office in March 2015 and properly filed with this court according to California probate statute. The silence in the courtroom was so complete that Maya could hear the ventilation system humming overhead. Victoria Ashworth's face went completely white, while Brad and Jennifer looked like they'd been physically struck. That's impossible, Brad said loudly, half rising from his chair. Dad didn't have a will. We searched through all his papers. Chin turned to face Brad with the kind of calm that suggested he'd been waiting years for this exact moment. Mr. Hendricks was very careful about document security, particularly regarding materials he considered sensitive. The will was executed in my office, witnessed according to California law, and filed with the probate court as required. Judge Reeves accepted the document from Chun, reviewing it with the careful attention of someone who understood the seismic shift occurring in her courtroom. After several minutes of study, she looked up with an expression that managed to be both surprised and impressed. This appears to be a properly executed will, Judge Reeves announced. The document specifically names Maya Elena Castellanos as my beloved daughter and primary beneficiary of the estate. Jennifer's gasp was audible throughout the courtroom, followed by Brad's angry objection. Stepdaughter, he said loudly. She's his stepdaughter, not his actual daughter. There's a legal difference. Chin's smile grew even more devastating. Your Honor, I believe the documentation will clarify the exact nature of Miss Castellanos' relationship to the deceased. However, I'd like to request access to sealed family court records from March 2015 that may provide additional context for the testamentary language. Maya felt the courtroom spinning slightly around her as the implications began to sink in. March 2015. The same month Robert had retained Chin's services. The same month something had happened that required sealed family court records. Victoria Ashworth was frantically conferring with Brad and Jennifer, their whispered conversation growing increasingly heated as they realized their legal strategy was crumbling in real time. Jennifer kept shaking her head and pointing at Maya, as if refusing to accept what was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone else in the room. Your Honor, Chun continued with the timing of a master chess player. I believe those sealed records will demonstrate that Ms. Castellanos' legal standing in this matter may surprise everyone involved. Judge Reeves nodded thoughtfully. Given these developments, I'm ordering a complete stay of all estate distribution pending review of all documentation, including the sealed family court records from March 2015. We'll reconvene Monday morning for full presentation of evidence. As the hearing adjourned, Maya caught sight of Brad and Jennifer's faces and felt something she hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. For the first time in weeks, they looked afraid. Chun gathered his materials with the same careful precision he'd shown throughout the hearing, his expression revealing nothing about the bombshells he'd just deployed with surgical timing. Mr. Chun, Maya said quietly as they prepared to leave, what exactly happened in March 2015? Chin's smile was gentle but mysterious. Miss Castellanos, your stepfather was a very thorough man who loved you more than you may have realized. I think Monday's hearing will provide some very illuminating answers to questions you didn't even know you should be asking. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that made everything feel sharper, more vivid, as if the world itself was preparing for revelation. Maya sat beside Martin Chun in courtroom 3B, watching as Brad and Jennifer entered with their legal team, looking noticeably less confident than they had just a week earlier. Victoria Ashworth's usually perfect composure showed hairline cracks, her movements slightly more abrupt than the fluid professionalism she'd displayed during earlier hearings. Judge Reeves called the session to order with her characteristic efficiency, but Maya sensed an undercurrent of anticipation in the formal proceedings. Even the court reporter seemed more alert than usual, fingers poised over her stenography machine as if expecting something significant to unfold. Mr. Chun, Judge Reeves began, you indicated that sealed family court records from March 2015 would provide context for the testamentary language in Robert Hendricks's will. Have those records been retrieved and reviewed? Chun rose with the measured grace that Maya had come to associate with moments of maximum impact. Yes, Your Honor. The sealed records have been authenticated by the family court clerk and are ready for presentation. However, I believe the contents may come as a surprise to all parties present. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as Chun approached the bench carrying a manila envelope that looked official and imposing. Whatever was inside had been sealed for 8 years, waiting for exactly this moment to reshape everything everyone thought they understood about family, law, and Robert's intentions. Brad and Jennifer exchanged nervous glances, their earlier smugness replaced by something that looked increasingly like panic. Jennifer's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the edge of the defendant's table, her knuckles white against the dark wood surface. Your Honor, Chun announced, his voice carrying the weight of revelation, I present to the court the sealed adoption decree for Maya Elena Castellanos, executed in family court on March 15, 2015, with Robert Michael Hendricks listed as the adopting parent. The words hit the courtroom like a physical force. Maya felt the air leave her lungs completely, her vision tunneling as the implications crashed over her in waves. Adoption decree. March 15, 2015. 3 months after her mother's death, when she'd felt most lost and alone in the world. That's impossible, Brad shouted, lurching to his feet with none of his usual calculated composure. Dad never mentioned any adoption. We would have known about something that important. Judge Reeves examined the document with careful attention, her expression growing more serious with each line she reviewed. This appears to be a properly executed adult adoption decree, signed by Family Court Judge Margaret Torres and witnessed according to California family law requirements. Maya stared at Chun in complete shock, tears flowing freely down her cheeks as 20 years of questions about her place in Robert's life suddenly crystallized into legal certainty. He adopted me, she whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. He actually adopted me. Jennifer's face had turned an alarming shade of gray, her voice rising to near hysteria. This is fraud. This has to be some kind of fraud. Dad would never have done something this drastic without telling his biological children. Chun turned to address Jennifer with the kind of patient calm that suggested he'd anticipated this exact reaction. Miss Walsh, adult adoption requires extensive legal documentation and court review to ensure the adopting parent is mentally competent and acting voluntarily. The record shows your father underwent psychological evaluation and provided detailed testimony about his reasons for the adoption. Victoria Ashworth recovered her professional demeanor enough to attempt damage control. Your Honor, even if this adoption is valid, it doesn't necessarily affect intestate succession rights. The timing and circumstances raise questions about whether undue influence may have been involved. Chin's smile was absolutely devastating in its quiet confidence. Your Honor, I believe Mr. Hendricks anticipated such challenges to his decision. The sealed file contains a handwritten letter explaining his reasoning, along with supporting documentation that addresses any concerns about competency or coercion. Judge Reeves nodded for Chun to continue, her expression indicating she was prepared to hear whatever bombshells remained in the sealed envelope. Maya felt like she was watching someone else's life unfold, unable to fully process that Robert had taken such dramatic legal action to protect her without ever mentioning it. Chun withdrew a single sheet of paper that looked like it had been written with careful attention to every word. With the court's permission, I'll read relevant excerpts from Robert Hendricks's letter dated March 10, 2015. The courtroom fell completely silent as Chun began reading in Robert's voice, somehow managing to channel the gentle authority Maya remembered so well. To whom it may concern, I am writing to document my decision to legally adopt Maya Elena Castellanos as my daughter. This decision comes not from grief or emotional manipulation, but from 20 months of careful consideration following my wife Elena's death. Maya sobbed openly as Robert's words filled the courtroom, his reasoning laid out with the same methodical care he brought to every important decision in his life. Chun continued reading as Maya tried to process hearing her stepfather's voice from beyond the grave, defending her place in his family with legal precision. Maya has been my daughter in every meaningful way since she was 8 years old, Robert's letter continued through Chin's steady voice. She has shown me unconditional love, provided emotional support during my darkest moments, and demonstrated the kind of character I hope to instill in all my children. This adoption simply acknowledges in law what has been true in my heart for decades. Brad made a strangled sound of protest, but Judge Reeves silenced him with a sharp look that brooked no interruption. Chun continued reading, his voice growing more solemn as the letter addressed the elephant in the room. I am aware that my biological children may contest this decision, Robert's words continued. Their recent behavior toward Maya following Elena's death, including suggestions that she should find her own housing and repeated assertions that she is not really family, has convinced me that legal protection for Maya's status is necessary. Jennifer's gasp echoed through the courtroom as the letter revealed that Robert had witnessed their cruelty firsthand, documenting it for legal purposes even as he'd seemed to remain above the family tensions Maya thought he'd missed. Chen's voice grew even more serious as he read the final devastating paragraphs. In recent months, Brad and Jennifer have made increasingly aggressive demands for advance inheritance distributions, threatening to place me in managed care if I don't comply with their financial requests. Maya, in contrast, has insisted on keeping me home and providing personal care during my illness, regardless of the impact on her own career and savings. Maya felt the courtroom spinning around her as Robert's letter systematically destroyed every narrative Brad and Jennifer had constructed about her motivations and their own devotion. Their threats, their demands, their conditional love, all documented in Robert's careful handwriting as evidence of why legal protection for Maya had become necessary. Judge Reeves's expression had grown increasingly stern as the letter's contents revealed the ugly family dynamics that had prompted Robert's dramatic legal action. Mr. Chun, does the file contain any additional evidence supporting these allegations about threats toward Mr. Hendricks? Chun nodded grimly. Your Honor, Robert was a thorough man who understood the importance of documentation. The sealed file contains audio recordings of several conversations where his biological children threatened nursing home placement unless he provided immediate financial distributions. Maya watched in amazement as Chun produced a small digital recorder, the kind Robert had used for dictating medical information during his cancer treatment. But apparently, he'd used it for other purposes as well. With the court's permission, Chun said, I'd like to play a brief excerpt from March 8, 2015, recorded in Robert's home during a family dinner. The courtroom speakers crackled to life with the sound of Robert's voice, weaker than Maya remembered, but still recognizable. The recording captured a family dinner conversation that Maya now realized had been deliberately documented for legal purposes. Dad, you're being ridiculous about this independent living nonsense. Brad's voice came through clearly, his tone dismissive and aggressive. You can barely manage the stairs anymore, and that cancer treatment left you confused about financial decisions. Jennifer, and I think it's time to explore some nice assisted living facilities. Maya's heart broke as she heard Robert's patient response, his voice tired but firm. I'm managing fine with Maya's help, Brad. My doctors have cleared me as mentally competent, and I prefer staying in my own home. Jennifer's voice cut through next, sharp with frustration. Maya can't provide proper medical care, Dad. She's just a school teacher, not a nurse. You need professional supervision, and frankly, we need access to your accounts to handle the transition costs. The recording continued for several more minutes, documenting Brad and Jennifer's systematic pressure campaign, while Robert remained diplomatically resistant. Maya realized she'd been in the kitchen cleaning up during this conversation, unaware that Robert was carefully preserving evidence of his children's true priorities. Judge Reeves's face had taken on the expression of someone who'd heard enough family ugliness for one lifetime. This recording certainly supports the claims in Mr. Hendricks's letter regarding pressure from his biological children. Victoria Ashworth made one final attempt at damage control. Your Honor, these family disagreements don't invalidate the biological children's inheritance rights under California law. Chen's response was swift and decisive. Your Honor, they do, however, validate the adoption decree and demonstrate that Robert Hendricks made his decision with full knowledge of his biological children's character and motivations. Maya is now legally his daughter with full inheritance rights under the amended will. Judge Reeves reviewed the adoption paperwork one final time before delivering her ruling with the authority that comes from decades of untangling family disputes. This court finds the adoption decree dated March 15, 2015, to be valid and properly executed. Maya Elena Castellanos is therefore the legal adopted daughter of Robert Michael Hendricks with full inheritance rights as specified in his last will and testament. Maya felt her knees give way slightly, the emotional weight of vindication and grief combining into something almost too powerful to bear. Robert had protected her, legally and completely, even knowing he might not live to see the protection needed. Brad and Jennifer sat in stunned silence, their faces reflecting the complete collapse of every assumption they'd held about their inheritance and Maya's place in the family hierarchy. 20 years of treating her like a tolerated outsider had just been revealed as 20 years of cruel behavior toward their legal sister. Judge Reeves continued with her ruling, each word falling like a hammer blow on Brad and Jennifer's shattered expectations. As Mr. Hendricks's legally adopted daughter, Ms. Castellanos is entitled to equal inheritance rights with any biological children under California succession statutes. Maya looked across the courtroom at Brad and Jennifer, seeing them clearly for the first time since this nightmare began. They weren't grieving children protecting their father's legacy. They were adults who had spent years viewing their father as a source of future financial security while treating his chosen daughter with systematic cruelty. But now the law recognized what Robert's heart had always known. Maya wasn't just a stepdaughter who had overstayed her welcome. She was his legal daughter, protected by adoption papers that had been waiting 8 years to serve their intended purpose. The justice was so complete, so perfectly orchestrated by Robert's careful planning, that Maya could almost feel his presence in the courtroom, watching his biological children finally understand the consequences of their choices. Judge Reeves straightened the adoption decree on her bench, the official document now serving as the foundation for a complete reconstruction of the Hendricks family inheritance. The silence in the courtroom stretched long enough for Maya to hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears, the sound almost drowning out the judge's next words that would reshape the rest of her life. This court rules that the adoption decree dated March 15, 2015, is completely valid and binding under California family law, Judge Reeves announced with the authority of someone accustomed to delivering life-changing verdicts. Maya Elena Castellanos is therefore legally entitled to full inheritance rights as the adopted daughter of Robert Michael Hendricks. Maya felt Chin's steadying hand on her shoulder as the enormity of vindication washed over her in waves. 20 years of being treated as a tolerated outsider had just been legally recognized as 20 years of sisterhood that Brad and Jennifer had willfully ignored. The adoption papers proved what Maya had always felt in her heart, but never dared claim in law. Victoria Ashworth rose with the desperate energy of someone watching a carefully constructed case collapse in real time. Your Honor, my clients request immediate appeal consideration. The timing and circumstances of this adoption raise serious questions about undue influence and mental competency that weren't adequately explored during the original proceedings. Judge Reeves fixed Ashworth with the kind of stare that had intimidated lawyers for 3 decades. Counselor, the family court conducted extensive competency evaluation before approving this adoption. Mr. Hendricks provided detailed testimony about his reasoning, underwent psychological assessment, and waited the required review period. Unless you have evidence of fraud or coercion not already considered, this court sees no grounds for challenging a properly executed legal adoption. Maya watched Brad's face cycle through expressions of disbelief, rage, and something that might have been panic as the implications became clear. His inheritance had just been cut in half by the sister he'd spent weeks systematically humiliating. The mathematical justice was almost too perfect to believe. But Chin wasn't finished delivering surprises. Your Honor, Chin said, rising with the measured timing Maya had learned to associate with maximum dramatic impact. Mr. Hendricks's protective planning extended beyond the adoption decree. He maintained a safety deposit box containing additional documentation that may be relevant to final estate distribution. Jennifer made a sound like a wounded animal, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. She gripped the edge of the defendant's table so hard her manicured nails left scratches in the dark wood, her face cycling between gray and red as if her body couldn't decide between fainting or exploding. "What additional documentation?" Judge Reeves asked, though her expression suggested she was prepared for whatever revelations remained in Robert's careful planning. Chen produced a small brass key and several official-looking papers. Mr. Hendricks updated his will in September of this year, 3 months before his death. The amended version increases Ms. Castellanos' inheritance percentage based on her extraordinary caregiving during his final illness. Maya stared at Chun in complete amazement, wondering how many more protective layers Robert had built around her future without ever mentioning his plans. The man who had patiently taught her to balance a checkbook and change a tire had apparently orchestrated one of the most comprehensive legal protections she'd ever witnessed. The updated will, Chun continued, leaves 75% of the estate to Maya, with the remaining 25% divided between Mr. Hendricks's biological children, contingent on their respectful treatment of their adopted sister during the probate process. Brad shot to his feet with an inarticulate roar of rage, his expensive suit unable to disguise the fact that he was essentially having a public tantrum in front of a judge who clearly had no patience for emotional outbursts. "That's impossible. Dad wouldn't have cut us out of our own inheritance for some charity case he felt sorry for." Judge Reeves's voice carried the kind of icy authority that could freeze lava. "Mr. Hendricks, you will sit down and control yourself, or you will be removed from this courtroom. Your father had every legal right to distribute his estate according to his wishes, and his wishes are clearly documented in properly executed legal instruments." Chun opened the safety deposit box contents with deliberate ceremony, revealing documents that would complete Robert's posthumous protection of Maya's interests. In addition to the updated will, Mr. Hendricks left detailed audio recordings documenting his biological children's behavior toward both himself and Miss Castellanos during his final months. Maya felt tears flowing again as she realized the true extent of Robert's careful observation during those final weeks, when she thought he was simply focused on managing his pain and medication schedules. He'd been systematically documenting everything that would be needed to protect her legally and emotionally after his death. Chun activated a small digital recorder, Robert's weak but determined voice filling the courtroom with evidence that would destroy any remaining sympathy for Brad and Jennifer's position. "This is Robert Hendricks speaking on October 15th. I'm recording this because I want there to be no question about my mental state or my reasoning regarding estate distribution." Maya closed her eyes and listened to Robert's voice with the bittersweet pain of hearing a beloved parent speak from beyond the grave. His words were measured and clear, displaying none of the confusion or diminished capacity that Brad and Jennifer had claimed affected his final months. "My biological children Brad and Jennifer have made it clear through their words and actions that they view my relationship with Maya as temporary and illegitimate," Robert's recorded voice continued. "They have demanded immediate access to my financial accounts, threatened to place me in managed care against my wishes, and repeatedly dismissed Maya's contributions to this family as worthless sentimentality." Brad and Jennifer sat frozen as their father's voice methodically documented every cruel conversation, every dismissive comment, every moment of callousness they displayed toward Maya while believing Robert was too sick to notice or care. Maya, in contrast, has provided round-the-clock care with no expectation of compensation or reward. Robert's voice continued with the kind of paternal pride that made Maya's chest ache with grief and gratitude. "She has advocated for my medical needs, maintained my comfort, and shown the kind of devotion I hope to inspire in all my children, but have only received from my adopted daughter." Judge Reeves listened to several minutes of Robert's testimony with an expression that suggested she'd heard enough family ugliness to last several lifetimes. When the recording ended, her ruling was swift and decisive. "This court finds that Robert Hendricks's testamentary decisions were made with full mental capacity and clear understanding of family circumstances. The updated will distributing 75% of the estate to Maya Castellanos and 25% to his biological children is valid and will be enforced." Victoria Ashworth made one final desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her client's expectations. "Your Honor, Surely the court can see that this distribution is grossly disproportionate given the biological relationship between Mr. Hendricks and his natural children. Judge Reeves's response carried the weight of 3 decades spent untangling family dysfunction. Counselor, Mr. Hendricks's biological relationship with his children is not in question. However, his legal right to distribute his estate according to his assessment of his children's character and behavior is absolute under California law. Chun delivered the final devastating blow with the timing of a master strategist. Your Honor, there's one additional matter. Mr. Hendricks's biological children have already disposed of significant estate assets without proper probate authorization. They sold his vehicle for cash, disposed of personal property, and changed locks on the family residence to exclude their adopted sister. Maya watched Judge Reeves's expression grow thunderous as the full scope of Brad and Jennifer's presumptuous behavior became clear. They hadn't just been cruel to Maya during their father's final weeks. They'd been actively looting an estate that wasn't legally theirs to touch. Mr. Hendricks and Miss Walsh, Judge Reeves said, her voice carrying the kind of judicial authority that could make seasoned criminals confess. You are hereby ordered to provide full accounting of all estate assets you have sold, removed, or disposed of since your father's death. All proceeds must be returned to the estate immediately. Brad's face had gone completely white as the financial implications hit him. The car sale, the furniture they'd marked for disposal, the bank accounts they'd assumed would be theirs to divide. All of it would have to be restored to an estate that now belonged primarily to the sister they'd spent weeks systematically humiliating. Furthermore, Judge Reeves continued, both biological children are ordered to pay Ms. Castellanos' legal fees as compensation for the frivolous challenge to her inheritance rights and the emotional distress caused by their premature disposal of estate assets. Jennifer finally broke completely, her composure dissolving into hysterical sobbing that echoed through the courtroom like an alarm system. This isn't fair, she wailed, sounding more like a frustrated child than a 32-year-old woman. We're his real children. We shouldn't be punished for protecting our inheritance. Maya felt a strange mixture of pity and satisfaction as she watched Jennifer's meltdown, remembering all the times she'd been on the receiving end of that same emotional manipulation when Jennifer wanted something from Robert. Chun leaned over to whisper in Maya's ear, his voice warm with satisfaction. The total estate value, including the house, investments, and liquid assets, is approximately $2.3 million. 75% of that belongs to you now. Maya's breath caught as the numbers sank in. She'd gone from homeless and nearly broke to inheriting more money than she'd ever imagined possessing. But more importantly, she'd gone from feeling like a tolerated outsider to being legally recognized as Robert's chosen daughter and primary heir. Judge Reeves concluded the hearing with the kind of comprehensive ruling that left no room for further dispute. Maya Elena Castellanos is awarded 75% of the Hendricks estate, including primary residence, investment accounts, and personal property. Brad Hendricks and Jennifer Walsh will split the remaining 25% after restitution of improperly disposed assets and payment of legal fees. As the courtroom began to empty, Maya watched Brad and Jennifer huddle with Victoria Ashworth, their animated discussion clearly focused on appeal possibilities they probably couldn't afford. Their confident superiority had been replaced by desperate damage control that was unlikely to succeed. Chun gathered his documents with the same methodical care he'd shown throughout the proceedings, his expression revealing quiet satisfaction at a job well done after 8 years of patient waiting. Mr. Chun, Maya said as they prepared to leave the courthouse, how did Robert know this would happen? How did he predict exactly how his children would behave? Chun's smile was both sad and wise. Miss Castellanos, your stepfather understood that character is revealed through crisis. He hoped his biological children would prove him wrong, but he prepared for the possibility that they would prove him right. Unfortunately, they exceeded even his worst expectations for cruelty. 3 weeks later, Maya stood in the living room of the house she'd grown up in, now legally hers beyond any possibility of dispute. Brad and Jennifer had been forced to return the proceeds from Robert's car sale along with several $1,000s in furniture and personal items they'd already sold or donated. The financial penalties had been severe enough to ensure they wouldn't be contesting anything else anytime soon. Maya had kept Robert's favorite armchair, the worn leather recliner where he'd read to her as a child and dozed during her high school graduation party. It sat in the same spot by the window where Robert had placed it 20 years earlier, sunlight streaming across the armrest where his hand had rested during countless Sunday afternoon conversations. The house felt different now, warmer somehow, as if Robert's legal protection had restored the sense of belonging that Brad and Jennifer's cruelty had temporarily stolen. Maya walked through rooms that held 2 decades of memories, finally able to grieve properly without the constant threat of displacement hanging over her emotional recovery. She'd established the Robert Hendricks Memorial Scholarship Fund for underprivileged students pursuing education degrees, using part of her inheritance to honor the man who'd shown her that family was about choice and commitment rather than biology. The scholarship would help young people who, like Maya, needed someone to believe in their potential and invest in their future. Maya kept Robert's medical journals from his final months, reading through his careful documentation of symptoms and treatments with new understanding of how systematically he'd been planning for her protection even while battling cancer. Every appointment notation, every medication schedule, every insurance claim had been recorded with the precision of someone who knew his time was limited and wanted to leave no loose ends for his chosen daughter to untangle. On a crisp December morning exactly 2 months after the final court hearing, Maya drove to Riverside Memorial Cemetery carrying flowers for 2 graves that represented the foundation of everything good in her life. Robert's headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription Maya had chosen, beloved father and husband. Elena's grave was next to Robert's, their final resting place reflecting the partnership that had given Maya the only real family she'd ever known. Maya placed white roses on both graves, her tears now carrying gratitude rather than the desperate grief that had consumed her during those dark weeks when she'd felt completely alone. "Thank you," she whispered to both headstones, her words carrying across the quiet cemetery like a prayer. "Thank you for showing me what family really means, and thank you for protecting me even when I didn't know I needed protection." As Maya walked back toward her car, she thought about the justice that had unfolded through Robert's careful planning and legal foresight. Brad and Jennifer had gotten exactly what they'd earned through years of treating their adopted sister like a temporary inconvenience. Their cruelty had been documented, their greed exposed, and their inheritance reduced to reflect their actual contribution to Robert's happiness during his final years. The house that had once felt like a battleground now felt like home again, filled with 20 years of memories that no court ruling could diminish or destroy. Maya was Robert's daughter, legally and emotionally, with documents and recordings that proved beyond any doubt how much she'd been loved and valued by the man who'd chosen to be her father. Family isn't just about blood relations, is it? Sometimes the people who choose to love us, who fight to protect us, who see our worth when others dismiss us, those are the ones who become our real family. Whether you've experienced that kind of chosen love or you're still searching for it, drop a comment below and let me know what family means to you. Because stories like Maya's remind us that justice sometimes takes time, but when it comes, it can be more complete and satisfying than we ever dared to hope.